Hello guys, welcome to another episode. We're carrying on our series of the Old Testament characters, and today we're looking at David. So, who is David? David was, first of all, a shepherd boy. So he just looked after sheep. He was the youngest of his siblings. He had many siblings with him. He didn't get into battles or anything like that until much later. But he was a good-looking boy, they said he was. But then came a time when he was anointed by God, chosen by God to become the king of Israel. And this shaped much of Israel's history. David was also of the lineage of Jesus, meaning that Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was once David. So he was quite an important character. So we're going to look more about him today. So we're going to look at two things about David today. One of those things is about the story of David and Goliath, how David took down Goliath, which was an impossible task, but somehow he done it. And the second thing we're going to look at is about the story between Saul and David, and how David was known to be a man after God's own heart. So, first up, we're looking at David and Goliath. I've got a short video for us to look at. Watch it and enjoy.
God's story, David and Goliath. So part of God's story is about the time David fought Goliath. And it begins like this. David was the youngest of 8 brothers. His job was being a shepherd, which meant he spent all day in a field watching sheep eat and roll around the grass. Meanwhile, some of his brothers were off with the Israeli army preparing for war against the Philistines. The Philistines were one of the toughest armies the people of Israel had to fight. So one day, David was taking food to his brothers because his dad asked him to. But when he got there, his brothers accused him of coming so he could watch the fight instead of the sheep. Since David knew in his heart he was just obeying his dad, he didn't mind being misunderstood. Anyway, while David was there, he saw a huge Philistine man, more than 9 feet tall, step onto the field between the two armies. He was wearing a thick helmet and armor and carrying huge weapons. His name was Goliath, and he was definitely used to being the winner. David found out that Goliath had been stepping onto the field like this every morning for the past 40 days and saying, "Give me a man and let us fight each other." But nobody from Israel was brave enough to fight him, even the king. Well, David didn't like that this giant was intimidating the Israelites. After all, they were God's special family. And because God was with the Israelites, they could have courage in any situation. So David, who wasn't even a soldier, told the king, "I'll fight against him." Nah, the king thought David was too small, but he feed Goliath's flesh to the birds, which made the giant even more mad. Then David took a stone, put it in the slingshot, and slung it at Goliath. Goliath didn't even get a chance to swing a sword because the stone hit him right in the forehead and sunk in deep. He face-planted straight into the ground. Nobody could believe it. Then David ran over, took hold of the giant's sword, and drew it from the sheath. He took the sword and cut off Goliath's head. David carried the head all the way back to Jerusalem. And when the Philistine army realized Goliath was dead, they started running away like a bunch of scaredy cats. The Israelites chased the Philistines, shouting loud.
Task had no prior experience of fighting in battle except for bears and lions. But he had no shield, nothing, just went bare and just trusting in God only. He didn't have trust in himself. He even said, "I don't think I can defeat him, but I trust in God." What an amazing thing. And that's why this story is so important, because we always want to remember that though you may feel like you're not capable of doing stuff, with God, all things are possible. What an amazing story. So we're looking at the second thing now about David and Saul. Here's another video coming up for you to look at that.
The Miracle of Mercy. David and Saul. This is David, David was a shepherd who lived in Israel. David was chosen by God to be the next king of Israel when he was just a boy. But David had to wait a very long time until that promise would come true because there was another king of Israel named Saul. Saul was strong and tall and looked like everything a king should be. But Saul did not follow God like he was supposed to. And for that reason, God chose to take the kingdom from Saul's family and give it to David's. David became a great warrior. And everyone in the kingdom loved David. This made Saul jealous, and Saul hated David because he thought he would try to kill him and take the throne from his family. So Saul wanted to kill David.
Whoa!
Saul hunted David, but he couldn't catch him. One day, Saul heard that David was in the wilderness of En-Gedi. So Saul gathered 3,000 of his skilled fighters and went to find and kill David. During Saul's search for David, he went in a cave to relieve himself. Well, this very cave was the one where David and his men were hiding. And when David's men saw that Saul was unaware that David was there and unable to defend himself, they said, "Now's your chance, David. This is God telling you that he will give you your enemy to do with as you wish." So David crept forward and cut off a piece of Saul's robe. But then David began to think that it was not right for him to take Saul's life. For no matter how much hardship and difficulty Saul had caused him, it was still not right for him to hurt the one who God had placed over Israel. So David told his men to back off, and he did not let them kill King Saul. They waited until after Saul had left the cave. And then David ran out of the cave and shouted after Saul, "My king! Why do you listen to people who say I am trying to harm you? Look, I cut it off, but I didn't kill you. This proves that I am not trying to harm you and that I have not sinned against you, even though you've been hunting me." David went on to promise that he would never harm Saul. David said that God would be the one to protect David and to rescue him from Saul's power. Saul said, "Is that really you, David?" And he began to cry. Saul said, "You are a better man than I. You have been amazingly kind to me today. For when God put me in a place where you could have killed me, you didn't do it. Who else would have done this? And now I realize that you are surely going to be king, and the kingdom of Israel will flourish under your rule. But promise me that when that happens, you will not kill my family." So David promised that he would not hurt Saul's family, and they left each other in peace. Now Saul continued to cause difficulty in David's life. But David kept his promise, and in time, David did become king of Israel. David was dearly loved by God, and Israel did flourish under his rule because David did everything that God wanted him to do, and he was a man after God's own heart.
So I hope you enjoy that clip. So you can see that Saul was so jealous of David, and he was jealous of the fame he was getting, and he just wanted to kill him. But David's amazing heart, that though he had opportunities to kill him, Saul himself, he didn't do it. Why? Because he looked at God's heart. He knew that that's not what God wanted. And that is so amazing. Having an enemy before you, but still saying, no, it's not for me to kill, but God is the one who's going to do it. Absolutely amazing, that story that we can learn. So, two things we looked at. What about some questions and some time to reflect now? And the question is, what would you do if you were David? So let's look back at the David and Goliath story. And put yourself in David's shoes. If Goliath had come and he's looking to fight someone. He's fighting he wants to fight the Israelites. And you're there. You're the youngest, and you have no battle experience. Would you have gone to fight Goliath? Would you have had a faith like that he had, just trusting in God and knowing that with God he can do anything? Let's reflect on that. The second thing we want to reflect on is, imagine with Saul and David, Saul constantly being in David's face. He was an enemy to David. David did not like being in his presence, being in front of him. What would you do if you had your enemy in front of you and you had plenty of opportunities to take revenge or to fight them back or to pay them back by doing something, but then you know that doing the right thing is not taking revenge, but it's to trust in God? What would you have done if you were in that position? So from this story of David, to conclude, there's two things really, once again, is that nothing is impossible for God. If you put your trust in God, it doesn't matter about your strength, it doesn't matter how young you are, it doesn't matter what you don't know. If you trust God, you have the faith, and you know that if God is for you, then nobody can be against you. And that's what we can learn about David. One really important thing is that you don't need to have the kind of weapons that he needed to fight Goliath. He just had a slingshot. Who would have thought that would have killed Goliath, right? But maybe think about yourself. You might think that, oh, I need to have a particular thing, or I need to be in this particular level to do this, but you don't. As long as you believe and trust in God, then he will see your faith and he will reward you for it. The second thing is that David was known to be a man after God's own heart. He didn't just pray the prayers what he wanted. He wanted what God wanted. And that's what we learn about Saul and David, is that though he might have wanted to kill Saul and get rid of him because he was just being so annoying, but he knew that God's heart was that he didn't want anger and revenge to kill Saul. He wanted to leave that up to God. And what we can learn from that is, we shouldn't always be praying what I want. Oh, mom, dad, I want this, I want that. Or maybe even praying to God, I want this, things that are going to benefit you, without looking at, well, God, what do you want? What's your will? What's your heart? Because, guys, God knows what's best for us more than what we need ourselves, right? Like your parents might always say to you, oh, you don't need that, you don't need this. And you might think, but I do need that, I do need this one. But the parents are wiser, and that's why they're your parents. They know what you need more than you yourself. So imagine God, even higher than your parents. He knows more what you need. And so though we pray for things that we want to be like David by praying and asking God, what do you want? What's your heart? Do I really need this? And I want to know what you think, because we know that what God thinks is the right thing more than what we want. Does that make sense? So we want to align our heart with God's heart. And if we do that, God is so pleased with you. And then you will stop fighting with yourself, with wanting the things that you want. But what does God want is the most important thing. So guys, that's it for today. I hope you learned two important things about David today. And always remember, nothing is impossible with God. And always praying what God wants, but not always necessarily what you want. Take care, guys, and we'll see you next week. Bye.